Down.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Mark Costers, and I work for VeriSign, and I'm going to put on this shirt. And I'm putting on this shirt because it's red, not to show solidarity with what some of you all are doing, and not because it's a PR ploy for VeriSign, but it's because if one of you throws a tomato at me, at least I'll be color coordinated.
It's actually because you've now got a job with the Marriott as the event staff.
So before I begin, there's a lot of facets that are involved with SiteFinder, and what I want to do is just hit upon some of the technical issues. As Randy said, VeriSign has not done anything strictly against spec. This is a social and business issues, and there's a lot of things that are kind of intertwined here. And what I'd like to do is discuss just the technical issues and the service issues associated with it. And questions other than that, other than technical, really need to be asked in other forums. So what I'd like to talk about today is what is SiteFinder, how did we implement it, some technical questions raised, DNS wildcard guidelines, and then take questions afterwards. So what is VeriSign SiteFinder? Well, what we did, and this is no surprise to most of you, but just to make sure, we used a DNS wildcard A record in the common net zones. And it only comes into play for non-existent domains, and the answer you receive from the GTLD servers that matches this is synthesized by the server, and therefore the client cannot tell if this is an actual response received from the wildcard itself. You would have to use other means to do so. It matches any number of labels, so if you go www.foo.bar.com.com, whatever, it will match that if that particular domain did not exist, and it is RFC compliant. This has been part of the RFCs and ever since the beginning, so it's in 1034 and 1035 and so on. So the intent of bringing this on was to provide a web search service. And what it tries to do is try to match domain names with known registered names, or if that doesn't work, offer other search alternatives. And I'm also going to go and show you some stats on that after a little bit. So now, as precedent-wise, this is not a new service. There's a lot of TLDs that have done this for many years. Doing some research, we've seen that it's been around since as early as 1998, and perhaps earlier in the TLD space. And many of them are out there. Some of them .biz, .us, and so on, BZCC, CN, yada, 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 all have tested or deployed wildcards in their TLD zones. And one of the things I want you to take home from this as you go forward is not so much focus on VeriSign, but look at this overall, because there's many other registries that are interested in providing this type of service. So you should kind of bear that in mind as you go forward. So one of the things that would be also useful is SecSac, which I'm also a part of, is a call for registries to provide data from their behalf so that they can help SecSac understand what all the issues are in a qualitative way. Oh, SecSac is ICANN's Security and Stability Committee. Thank you. So the SiteFinder implementation, before all this began, a bunch of the techies got together and wrote the details of what a service ought to look like in a public white paper. And if there's enough interest, maybe that should become an RFC, because it gives some sort of uniform characteristics that one may want to provide as part of wildcard service. We also did testing prior to launch. This is not something that came out of the air. And after launch, there was a lot of stuff that came up on the list, right? And we established a technical review panel to look over some of the issues that came up. And their findings are, or at least the names are there. Some of the findings were actually given at the most recent SecSac meeting that actually convened last week in Washington, D.C., and that's on the ICANN website. Monitoring is also a big part of this, and this is the part that I find very interesting, is at the onset we are under some rather severe denial of service attacks. they came in various flavors. Some was just the various sort of syntax that one sees. Some of them were a little bit more interesting in that there's some Apache bugs that can be tickled through some specially crafted URLs. And there's also a problem with tainted domains. A number of attack drones are waiting to communicate to their mothership. Specifically, it's a, let's see, Win32 OpenSoft G virus that's out there. And that created a huge amount of traffic going to our site, you'll see in a second. So 98.7% of all the traffic going to SiteFinder initially was HTTP. But as we went through solving these issues, things changed. So after we took care of the viruses and denial of service attacks and the specially crafted URLs that tickle Apache servers, we had some fairly interesting statistics that have come out of this. And you look here, you'll see that 85% of the connection attempts are for HTTP or SMTP. And this is SYNs. This is not aggregate traffic. So this gives you a fairly reliable sort of percentage in terms of what's hitting us. For the things that we were not listening to, we issued a TCP reset. For UDP, we issued an ICMP port unreachable. And you can see that most of the remaining protocols aside from HTTP and SMTP was basically in the noise. Now here's a daily representation of the daily traffic at the SiteFinder. And you can see that this first part going up to September 24th, that we were under fairly sustained denial of service attacks and dealing with this various forms of this worm. And afterwards, you'll notice that things kind of flatten out pretty much with a few dips and rises until the service was actually turned off on October 4th. So what's interesting about this is even though a lot of people put in Paul's patch and, ISC's patch, dealing with delegation only and so on that Suzanne's going to talk about in just a little bit, that it really didn't affect us all that much. So here are some user characteristics. It's really no surprise that the majority of the browsers actually hit the HTTP service was from Microsoft. So we averaged we had 90.6 million visitors come to the site and had 6.6 unique visitors per day. And once they came to the site, a large number of the users actually did use the site, whatever their motivations were. It did have some interesting sort of user characteristics in that 45.3 million actually used the text search and 6.7 million used the did you mean functionality in SiteFinder. So there's been a lot of technical questions that have been raised, a large number of them on NANOG, and I'm on the list. I hear what's going on, and so does a lot of other people in VeriSign. And there's also been other issuances. Now, the IAB came out with a statement. SecSac, the Security and Stability Committee from ICANN, came out with a message. And other discussion venues, and as well as input to our tech support lines that we have. And as a result, we've been working on these things and updating the technical FAQ that's out there. And again, you're more than welcome to take a look at it and see what you think, and comments would certainly be appreciated. VeriSign also issued a response to a number of IAB's and SecSac's concerns, and that again is at that URL below. And finally, there is a list set up to discuss this specifically, and a number of the VeriSign technical people are on that list. So feel free to join that and let people know what's going, or say what you want to say. We'll answer anything that's technical in nature on that list. And there's been things on the list saying, hey, look, VeriSign's going to use this for PR purposes and so on. And frankly, the list is on a separate box. We have nothing to do with it. We have no idea who's on the list or whatever else. But we certainly like to hear from you and have some interesting discussions. So going on with the issues, I'm going to go on through this fairly quickly because I'm seeing I'm running out of time, aren't I? Yeah. Okay, so that SMTP bound server was not the answer, right? First going through Snubby, and that was certainly not right, and going through a more RFC compliant solution, we put that in fairly quickly. If and when the service comes alive again, it would be more appropriate to put a wildcard MX with a non-existent target in it. Most of the mail servers actually do the right thing in that case. The only one that doesn't at this point is postfix, and the maintainer does know about this. Spam, dorkslayers.com was fixed for those people who use the spam assassin on September 16th. Forward DNS lookup of sender domain was another issue. And from what we've seen, and we did some empirical testing on this, is that most spammers have moved on from that. And things using our own spam traps, we're seeing only 3%. Now, we're looking for some other empirical statistics, and I know that KC has put out a call for NANOG for more information, and this would be very useful. So, misconfigurations. MX as a non-existent target, with a non-existent target. We surveyed 20 million common net domains, and 0.077% had this particular issue. So what was more common is MX with known unroutable addresses at 6.135%, and that's those addresses are enumerated in RFC 3330. MXs with IP addresses as a target, 1.5%, and the non-existent target is much lower than that. Another misconfiguration is the net BIOS failover. And frankly, that's just dangerous to begin with. And we had actually a number of people come up to us and thank us for helping them realize what sort of resolution logic their VPN clients went through. And that scared them, that they didn't catch this before. So on privacy, we're not collecting the data. There's a privacy statement there. And I know that VeriSign's also interested in other areas and opportunities to make it more satisfactory to the community. So moving forward, DNS wildcard guidelines. As I mentioned before, a lot of other registries are interested in the service. And we think it's appropriate that they document good technical practice, because many of the existing ones that are out there exhibit different characteristics. And this is probably not what we really want. We want to have good, consistent behavior. And again, we put out some draft guidelines to that, and it's at the SiteFinder site, at that URL below. And the analysis that we've done actually went into the document, and we've incorporated ideas that we've gleaned from over the last year from various sorts of forums, as IAB Center, NANOG, et cetera. And we would certainly like to have comments from you. So now there's 3 areas that one can actually send their questions to. SiteFinder specific questions could be sent to VeriSign. And I certainly like to hear from you whether or not you received a good response. We've also put out a call for hard data, and KC did that a couple days ago on the NANOG list, saying to sexact-comment@icann.org. And there's, again, that technical discussion list that's been set up to discuss this as well. So that's it.
Thank you. Suzanne?
You're afraid. Bill is afraid to touch the laptop here, which probably puts us ahead of the game. Thanks, Susan. Good morning. I'm going to try to get through this quickly because I want to leave room for comment and discussion, but I'm Suzanne Wolf from ISC, and I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the workarounds that appeared and some of the issues around the responses to SiteFinder. I can't talk for the whole community, but I can talk about some of what happened, what we saw, because we've had kind of a front row seat. Yeah. Just for a quick review, Yeah, the normal functioning of the DNS, what you see is three kinds of responses. You'll see a normal answer, here's the data you asked for, here's a referral or delegation, here's where you go for the answer you wanted, and a negative answer, NX domain or rcode 3, which just says there is no such name. And what SiteFinder changed was the circumstances under which you would see that, which went from whenever the name didn't otherwise exist to not at all. Just a little bit from the responses we were hearing, what were people disturbed about, particularly not about SiteFinder as such. Anybody who wants to can run a search engine. Many do. There were some political and business concerns that are frankly out of scope here for the technical and operational concerns. Strictly speaking, though, the change to the behavior of the DNS violated the principle of least surprise. People woke up, the world was different in some wide-ranging ways. They didn't feel they could do anything about it, and that they were incurring costs to cope. And for us, for ISC, we're a not-for-profit. We publish Bind, we operate a root name server, we do a bunch of other public sector infrastructure work. The reason we got involved has to do with Bind as a prominent DNS implementation. We were being asked for some response. Our relevance and success depend on responding to the technical community. And the technical community was very negative about SiteFinder, particularly right away. Workarounds started appearing pretty much immediately. By the time we had even started talking over what our customers wanted. Unofficial patches to translate, the obvious thing to do was translate a certain address, hack around a particular IP address, substitute rcode 3 where you expected to get one before. There are problems with that. The address could change naturally, other TLDs use other addresses. It was a bad answer. Another workaround that we talked about early on and implemented as delegation only is that it gave the administrator the ability to only see referral data for a certain TLD, or for any domain really. It meant that normal answers that weren't referrals would get turned into rcode 3. This was released as a new Bind 9 feature within a couple of days. Frankly, everybody that works on Bind 9 was working on making sure that we could do this and make it work and make it correct. This is not Bind's default behavior. It will not be Bind's default behavior. It's a tool placed in the hands of administrators who want to use it. Sort of a refinement on this, another workaround would be to explicitly enumerate which TLDs you want to accept non-referrals from. We list common exceptions, and as part of the Bind product documentation. This is an even more powerful knob for the administrator, and we seriously recommend being very, very careful about deploying this. It's not Bind's default. It's not going to be Bind's default, but it's there if the network administrator wants it to be there and wants to use it. There was another workaround that we brought out for Bind 8 users that didn't have the equivalent of delegation only or root delegation only. It's selectively forwarding. Frankly, I personally am glad this isn't widely used. I don't think it's very good. It's a hack. There are some other workarounds we saw people using that frankly scared a lot of us even more. Anybody who runs local network infrastructure can advertise their own instance of the IP address that SiteFinder is returning. Typos are handled locally with VeriSign's data, but local content, it introduces incoherency. But again, people are seeing some local advantage and some people are doing this. The workaround to remap rcode 3 to a local server. Again, people can do this. They're seeing less reason not to. This has actually been observed. not a very good idea in some ways. It certainly isn't going to do much for coherency of the DNS locally or globally. These are the other applications that we've heard a lot of comments about having workarounds in place. A couple of the DNS server implementations actually had patches out before we did, and most of the common email packages seem to also have implemented workarounds pretty quickly. There has been some comment or some question about protocol violations in the SiteFinder service. That's not part of the problem. The protocol isn't violated by this behavior. You send queries, you get well-formed answers. Most of the workarounds don't violate the protocol either. The issues that come up are operational. What you see is an increase in the incoherency and decrease in the ability to trust what you're going to get when you send a DNS query. Real quick, some numbers we had seen. MSN, distinct visitors down. VeriSign traffic rank with Alexa went way up, way fast. The papers that we saw discussing, I think Mark also went over, some significant number of Alexa users didn't see the synthetic data for various reasons having to do with these workarounds. What we saw in summary, just from our customers and from the community, it was a strong response, a lot of workarounds, trying to turn back the clock, trying to keep revenue local, some even more widely affecting, at least in the local scope, than SiteFinder. This, to us at least, raises some stability concerns just about what people expect to see from the DNS. And the bibliography is actually in the slide set that's online, so feel free to look at any of these references, any of the references that Mark used. And the ICANN Security and Stability Committee really does need hard data. So if you have numbers, anything quantitative on how any of this affected your network, time you spent dealing with the impacts, increases in customer support burden, any of those kinds of things. People do want to hear it. And that's all I got for today. I hope there's time for questions.
There are. You spoke fast. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. If you have questions you would like to, you can wake up now. There are microphones in the middle. We've got time for maybe 3 or 4.
Randy Bush, IIJ. Mark, first of all, that quote you started out with for me was reference to it doesn't strictly break any DNS protocol spec. As I think you will see in the next presentation, there's a long list of applications it breaks. Secondly, I can't say anything about sex acts, but this certainly is a weird NANOG. And I think attempts to deal with this one more thing is the ports you talk of and inconsequential ports. We have to remember that the difference in the model between the internet and the telco is the internet is a clear end-to-end transport in the core and all the richness is at the edge, as opposed to the telco where if I want to implement a new feature, I have to change the core of the network. And I would remind you that ports such as port 25 and port 80 were once not used and then seen very little. And today email and the web predominate the net. So calling some port that you don't recognize today, oh, who cares, let the suckers die, is not really what many of us think of as the internet. I think all those protocols and the damage that may be done to them is of high consequence to all of us. and that the problem really isn't the DNS. The DNS specifications are being followed. And I don't think we should try to fix this in the DNS by hacking on the protocol or prohibiting this or that or putting hacks in server code. The problem is what this does to applications, and applications that we know and applications that we don't know, because the next killer app is being developed by somebody around the side in some research group that we don't know of today in some strange place in Geneva.
Is that a question?
Or a statement.
John?
John Curran, XO Communications. Two questions. First, I recognize your slides specify, Mark, we should keep these to not policy questions, technical questions, so I'll respect that. But it's a policy question of, does VeriSign have the right to do it, should have been put in, all those other wonderful things. But it's a technical and operational question about whether or not anyone should have been told first. That could be anywhere from an email to the NANOG list to a slide deck saying, hey, this is what we intend to do. We're not talking about .museum here. We're talking about .com and .net, which have, quite a bit of traffic, okay, at the end of the day. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering, is there some reason why we didn't get any operational coordination on this?
Actually, this question came up at the SecSac meeting that Randy so affectionately calls it. And the answer that Chuck Gomes gave was it was done on business and competitive reasons why there was no notice given. And again, that's not without precedent, because Newstar did that with .biz and .us a couple of months earlier.
So, but recognizing the size of .com, I guess I'd have to say, so is that the policy going forward?
Well, no. No, it's actually not. Rob, let me finish, and then you can go on. Okay. Okay. It is one of the things that VeriSign also has put out is that they plan on giving some sort of notice in the future, and what we'd like to hear from now is what is the length and time that was appropriate time of notice for these sort of things.
I'm Rob Seastrom, and I was the person who asked that question at the SecSac meeting. And
did I respond correctly to what?
I take issue with your characterization of Chuck Gomes' response as anything other than equivocation.
I'd certainly like to hear from you then.
It seemed to me that Chuck did not answer the question and basically dodged it. And when I tried to get him to quantify what kind of advance notice we would get, basically gave a non-answer.
I think that this stuff has all been evolving over time, and there's been more recent thinking that we would like to hear from the community and this is a positive thing, right? Is that we need to hear from the community in terms of what is appropriate time, warning time to put out news services.
If you'd like my suggestion, it's the length of the VeriSign contract plus a day. My second question. My second question is, you said on your slide, policy questions are more appropriately directed to another forum. Which forum?
So, one of the possible...
Or is that a policy question?
A more appropriate venue for that sort of thing, maybe I can.
All right, thank you, Mark.
We are now impacting on the next session, or the next presentation. Suzanne, you had something you wanted to comment?
Only that the assumption that John referred to, and that I've heard many, many other places, quantifying, if at all possible, what difference it does make, whether it's a large domain or a smaller one, is one of the things that needs to be considered for best practices or a community response on this. So certainly any way of characterizing the difference between .museum doing this and .com we need to do that as a community in order to go forward from here.
So are we done?
Patrick, make it real quick, and that's the last one. And then we'll take, these guys will be around, right?
All right. I had a few
Feel
questions.
free
I'll
to
just-
corner them.
I had a few questions. I guess I'll just ask one. I'm wondering why you think it's okay for you to raise my spam rate by 3%.
From my perspective, it was more of it. Well, my group took a look at this and said, okay, how big is this? And all I wanted to do is report back and saying, Gal, is it 40%? Is it 5%? Is it 3%? But it's a number I just thought I'd bring to the table. Well, for me, I mean, I use Spam Assassin, right? And it caught all that stuff before it got through.
Randy wants to say
No, we really want Dwayne to get up and talk.
Randy wants to say one thing,
I understand.
a different topic.
Point of order. The people on the wireless will notice that it sucks caterpillar snot. The reason is there are a number of infected hosts here. Need I say more? We're trying to find Philip Smith, who has some tools for quickly dealing with them. Philip, if you're around, come to the back. And those who are infected, we will quickly deal with you.
So everyone on the right side of the room, turn off your machines. Okay. Dwayne?
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you very much.
I said this at the post that I sent to NANOG last week, but there's already been a few questions here that suggest that you haven't read the transcripts or looked at the video of the meetings that have happened in D.C. There have been 2 meetings, at least 12 hours total. Is it not? At least 12 hours total, and the transcripts are on there. The video's on there for the first meeting. And the video's on there for the second meeting. I don't think the transcript is up for the second meeting yet, but it may be soon. Steve may know more than I do. But you're strongly encouraged to read through this stuff. A lot of this stuff has been covered. Not necessarily to your satisfaction, but it behooves you to know what's already been said in public forum in D.C. before you come to the mic. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve.
Welcome
Bell.
back.
Thank you. Thank you. My question's actually to the room on this topic. It follows up on a question I raised at the last. I'll have to call it the Security Stability Committee. I can't pronounce the acronym anymore after Randy's observation. One of the comments by people from VeriSign is that a number of the problems that have been observed or analytically seemed likely from your review panel is that some software changes might be necessary. Mark, you noted that postfix was going to need some change to deal with the proposed new change to the MX handling.
If one makes this change to the MX behavior, and if it does go live again, there's a couple caveats. Let me start over again. If there's a wildcard MX added, and that MX as a target goes to a non-existent domain, that the sort of appropriate behavior exists except for postfix and some older variants of Windows NT 4.0 and stuff like that.
Right. Okay, so my question is to the operational community, how much time do you want, how much notice do you want before deploying changes in your network? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's got to be done by end users, and that's a hopeless case. We all know that. But I'm talking about infrastructure stuff. How much notice do people here want? Who wants at least 1 month? 2 months. I should say, is 2 months enough? 3 months? 4? 5? Right. I understand that. I'm trying to get sense of it. Who thinks that a year would be enough time? Maybe. Thank you. I've also posted a question to the mailing list, but given Randy's observations about excretions from Lepidoptera, I'm not certain it's gotten out to the NANOG list yet, so let's take it there.
Mark, given the role of the registry as a neutral Shepard of Global Resource. I'm interested in your comment of not wanting to pre-announce due to competitive needs.
First of all, that's not my comment, right? I was channeling Chuck Gomes in that case. So, this is something I think that we can move more positively in the future on. And again, I think this is a time that the community can come together and say, hey, look, we're going to be reasonable, and this is what we like to see. And so this is an opportunity for everybody to come together and say, this is what we like to see going forward.
Anyone else? Going once, going twice? No, you're not in the, oh, I'm sorry, this is NANOG. Are you from the North American area at all?
Purely as an observer.
Purely as an observer, okay.
Okay, my name's Bruce Campbell from the RIPE NCC. I've got more of an observation.
Closer.
That I can actually speak into the microphone. A lot of the talk and so forth about the whole VeriSign, Wildcard and SiteFinder, first of all, it's as Suzanne said, it's the principle of least surprise has been violated because we didn't get the notification. Well, accept whatever you said for the reasons there. One of the other things there's a lot of people that simply do not trust VeriSign. So a lot of the comments there, we will do an MX wildcard that points to an unreachable. How do we know that will always point to an unreachable? Another thing is, how do we know that VeriSign will not do something with the data? There's a lot of VeriSign is saying, trust us. The question is, can we?
Of course, they're VeriSign. Just the same way we can trust RIPE NCC not to leak your data or share it. And RIPE NCC is in the same boat, right?
Okay, so I've heard lots of really constructive comments that have come in various forums, right? And one of the things that has come regarding the privacy issue is that there's third parties that actually do audit your compliance to these things. And this is something that I would recommend going forward, is that you have some third party that audits these things. And this is true with lots of other places that geeks really just don't really trust. Microsoft is yet another example, right?
Mark, no matter how well-intentioned or how much VeriSign does to uphold whatever privacy policies, you've created a really attractive target for government abuse.
George Jones with MITRE. Just one sort of comment. If there is assumed behavior or historical behavior and there are trust issues with Microsoft, my suggestion would be that somebody draft an RFC and remove the ambiguity.
I think that would be a useful thing.
Hi, I'm Greg Maxwell, and I've got a little question. Since the SiteFinder service really only addresses the HTTP service and its results right now, everything else is just, it's trying not to break, SMTP. Why not leave that logic in the application rather than putting it into the DNS system?
So do you want me to, what sort of answer do you want from this, right?
Well, what's your position on that? I mean, if you're only serving one service, why isn't that functionality being left to the application? Why is it being put into the DNS system?
Okay, so this is actually going a little bit beyond my realm, right? In terms of, okay, actually I'm going to go on a rant here. I think this is the best way of doing it. So, okay, I'm a researcher.
You got 40 seconds.
I have 40 seconds for my rant, so I'm going to speak really fast. I can't do as fast as KC, but I will try. So what's happened is the internet's become successful, and a lot of things have yet to be done that haven't been done. One of the things that hasn't been done yet is actually create a directory service that actually works, right? And unfortunately, we're in this double critical mass problem where people aren't willing to set up the services because there's no clients. Clients aren't willing to be developed by software vendors because there's no demand. So we see we're kind of in this crux right now of trying to provide better sort of internet service. And right now, you know, teaching HTTP:// to my grandmother is not something I look forward to. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to figure out, let's go forward and find better ways. Here's one possible avenue that some people don't like. Let's find a better one.
Thank you.
Would you have preferred a wildcard NAFTA record to a wildcard A? Sorry, rhetorical question. Bill.
Let me give perhaps a speculative answer that Mark can't to that last question, which is why not do it at the application layer? This is, to some degree, already being done at the application layer. This has been estimated by some people to be about $100 million a year revenue stream, and that is being split by Microsoft and Netscape right now. And so it's, again, a question of competition, not a question of technical merit at that point. So that's one answer. I don't know how much that relates to reality, but that's an answer I've been hearing batted around a lot.
So, this is Chris Linstopy. The comment that was made just a couple minutes ago about directory service, and there is no good directory service for the web. Would we all agree that there is a directory service for the telephone system? When I dial a telephone number that's not out of order, I don't expect Ma Bell to come back and say, would you like to try and dial, you know, Domino's Pizza instead? What number were you looking for? On a slightly more serious note, if VeriSign is playing the card of we are independent trusted party, and that's why you should trust us with your private information, your email bounces, etc., then it should take the commercial issue off the table. Either you're a commercial entity or you're a private trusted third party. Thank you.
No, Robert, you're first.
Okay. Rob Seastrom again. In the honored practice of asking Mark speculative questions, I'd like to lay out something. At the close of the SECSAC meeting, I said, and I'd like to develop it a little bit more here, that I believe that sending an authoritative response when one should be sending R code 3 violates the conservative in what you send and liberal in what you accept practice at layer 7, and that moreover it violates the principle of least user astonishment, and that it would probably be a good idea to address this in the standards process so that any place in the DNS hierarchy where there was a customer-vendor relationship or a delegation, that wildcarding was expressly discouraged. And so the speculative question is, if this were in fact addressed in the standards process, what would VeriSign's response be? Would VeriSign believe that they are bound by this sort of thing, or would they say, well, you know, doesn't apply to us?
So, okay, so as I look at this, is usually we're bound by contract, and these sort of things need to be bound in contract, but there's also a sort of social responsibility. I know you guys are kind of look at that and say, what is Custer saying here? But there's the other part of it too, and I think that these things all need to be put in consideration. That's a no. No, that's not a no. I don't think that's a no.
Then can you elaborate on it a little bit more than just that you would take it into consideration? You're starting to channel Chuck Gomes again.
Okay, so I'm not really the authoritative figure for you to ask that question to.
Okay, that's a fair enough answer. Thank you.
One of the early VeriSign
I just want to add that actually Matt just said we do honor all the contracts, and it does within the contracts itself, it does specify DNS standards. So if one wants to read those contracts, those are the things that the company itself is actually obligated to actually follow. Sorry about that, sir.
One of VeriSign's early responses to ISC's delegation-only fix was end users are free to do that. We don't mind if people do that. If you put the wildcard back, when Microsoft puts logic in their client to defeat it, does this mean we're not going to see an arms race? Or do we need to start the arms race now?
Again, you're asking a speculative question, and so.
And I stated my assumptions.
I
Answer
can
it.
give a speculative answer, but I don't think that would be sufficient, so I don't think I will. My sense is okay. You're going to go.
Would you like me to channel Mark Koster's channeling Chuck Gomes?
So, but you guys, you also need to realize that I'm a techie, just like you guys, and the authority is made by others that are within my company. And so, what I'm trying to answer is the community is important to us. It's important to me, and these things that you look at, we have to figure out what the best solution is. And one of the things is, and I'll go back to it, this call for analysis by the Security and Stability Committee to look at this, I think is a very important thing, because right now there's no arms race because it's not on. And if it does come on again, there's going to be some sense of adequate notice. And it would be useful, again, for having some sort of adequate, for us to define what adequate notice actually is.
There are 3 people at the microphones, 4 if you count me, because I have a question. Suzanne is lonesome. Everyone's picking on Mark. I want to pick on Suzanne. The break is out there. The coffee's getting cold. So I would suggest, for me, I don't mind if you guys get up and leave. If you want to stick around and ask questions, I think I can hold these folks up here at the table. So go ahead.
Owen DeLong, Tell Me Networks. You say that you're bound by your contract, and yet, at least in ICANN's interpretation, the wildcard was in violation of the contract, and they sent you notice of such, which is what finally caused you to turn it off. Now, Chuck Gomes has again been saying that you guys basically intend to turn it back on again, with some level of notice, mumble, won't say when. So, given that, it sounds like VeriSign either doesn't have the same opinion of what the contract says as ICANN does, or doesn't actually really feel all that bound by it.
I really think that's a lawyer question. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer it.
My name is Timothy Brown. This is not a lawyer question. You made the comment that you feel that you care about the community. I'm just wondering if the words abuse of power were ever mentioned in internal discussions at VeriSign, if you can give that answer.
There was a lot of discussion about turning on this service, and there was a lot of discussion in terms of what is the way to actually go forward and making it happen. And so one of the things I think that came out of this is that one of the missteps made was lack of adequate notice.
Thank you.
Mike O'Connor, SGI. One question. Were there ever any thoughts about providing a directory service for things other than the web in the same context? Like if you have a bunch of NetBIOS queries that hit there, return something that says, "So sorry, you're broken. Go fix it," or and I saw a list of other protocol, a mail server that bounced with a directory service message. Was this always just web only, or were there intents to go beyond that?
Did you hear that?
I didn't get all of that, and neither did the rest of the folks up here. So you're asking about, is there an intent to provide Or was there ever an intent to provide a different tool?
To expand beyond, okay, you're directing all sorts of traffic for things that are non-web to SiteFinder or to the SiteFinder IP. Was there an intent to have something besides a web server on there for some of the other protocols that get diverted there?
So the thing that actually guided this was that there's a guidelines document that was actually on the SiteFinder website that describes what services ought to be on this thing and what ought not to be, and if they're not, what should the behavior be.
Okay.
So that's in the document.
Okay.
Wait a minute. I got one question for Suzanne. I told you I was saving it for later. I'm keeping her here without coffee so she can answer my question. And this actually applies to the hard data. ISC has released software which allows people to make local decisions about what they will respond with. This will impact how the coherency of the DNS, and I would like to know what kinds of instrumentation need to be deployed so that people can find out who's turned this knob on and how deep that penetration goes.
Adam Rothschild, and I have a question for VeriSign.
Wait, hang on just a second. Suzanne's answering a question for me.
That's not really a question for me. That's a question he's asking for me, because we would love to know. We know what the download figures are, but we don't instrument bind, as part of distributing it freely. We don't instrument it so that we know who's downloaded it or what they're using it for. So if you are using any of the delegation-only features, we'd actually like to hear from you. How many users, if you feel free to discuss that, and anything you feel like disclosing about whether you're using it and how, because we don't know either.
Okay, now if you want to talk to the VeriSign or the ISC people, they're getting coffee. It's the break time. So come up and get them quick before they go.